name's Breach, and welcome to our review of Deus Ex Human Revolutions, the second game I played in the Deus Ex franchise after trying the first. Just finished it, including its DLC, and I'd like to give my thoughts on it, especially if this is a franchise you guys have been looking at for a long time, because it's very big and very popular overall. Hasn't had a game for a while, but it's likely to have one in the future. Human Revolution, you take on as Adam Jensen, and he is the coolest, the absolute coolest, and that is the main point of his character and how he portrays in cutscenes, is that he is super cool. He's gravelly, he's got that voice, and he's also a mecha man. The story we're going with here is Adam Jensen is the top security officer for a giant corporation called Sarif Industries. And at the start of the game, you're having a little meeting with your boss, Big Dave Sarif, and something's about to be announced. Some big medical breakthrough in human augmentation. This is giving people robot arms and things like that to make them stronger at their jobs, etc., etc. This is causing a big problem in the general public because companies are obviously kind of pushing people who are doing sort of menial tasks to get augments to make them more efficient. Even if they can't afford them, they end up in a ton of debt, and certainly can't afford the drugs required to prevent rejection of having these augments, therefore putting them in a really bad state of physical health. So you can imagine a certain delivery company, for example, wanting people to get augmented arms so they can carry things around much easier. But our doctor, one of our main characters of the game, Dr. Megan Reed, has discovered something. It's all very vague at this point in the game as to what she's discovered, but essentially it turns out that she's discovered a way of radically reducing the chance of being rejected and having to be on this medicine at all. And if Sarif Industries goes forward with this, they're going to be by far and away the #1 company globally to get your augments and stuff from, because you're not going to have perpetual bills going forward in order to maintain your augments. You're likely just to be able to install them, and you should be good to go for the remainder of your life. And as this is about to happen, there's a bit of a shadowy cabal of people in the cutscene who are aware that this announcement's going to be made. They don't know how she's done it, but they're aware it's about to be announced. And so they send a crack team of agents, these are going to be our bosses for the game, into the building in order to kidnap Megan and kill a bunch of people and prevent the launch of this product. And then months pass. But during this attack, Adam Jensen, in his more human form, gets bashed in to death, and then we wake up 6 months later, and Adam is now turbo-augmented. He is super cool and super metallic, and he's got badass stuff. He's got new arms. He's basically just a head at this point, I think. Essentially, he's just that's all the biological element that's left is just his head, which even has augments of shades. That's right, he has, like, nanotechnology sunglasses. It's very cool. As you get, Adam Jensen is very cool. So let me get into the game itself. Now, the big thing about Deus Ex, which makes the gameplay S tier, is that you can do whatever you want. You can guns blaze, you can be super stealthy, but beyond that, the routes and ways of approaching any of the mission objectives in the entire game are really varied. You'll find many, many ways of reaching the same point, depending on what you find first, how much exploration you do, how forefront you want to go, and which augments you have. Do you have augments that make you jump ridiculously high? You can probably just leap the fence and break into a compound, right? Can you just go completely invisible with a cloaking device, in which case you can just walk past the guards at the main gate, etc., etc. You can punch through walls. You could leap off the building if you've taken the Icarus falling system, where you'll slowly descend, and you can use that to stun enemies and things like that. And obviously, the big one for me in this game, and one of my main critiques, is lethal versus non-lethal. Because you've got so many options, you can in fact do the entire game without killing a single person, kind of. And this is where it gets a little weird, because the foundation of Deus Ex, as it was in the first game and here, is these multiple approaches that you can take to completing your objectives. Even to the point where later on, you'll be presented with a very black and white A and B choice, and because you know the nature of Deus Ex, there's probably a secret third choice that you could do in order to get a more favorable outcome for how you want to play the game. And the game justly rewards you for figuring that out, even though it didn't actually present you that option. You know it's probably there because of the nature of the game. This is the absolute strength of Deus Ex, is the ability to manipulate and talk to people, knock them out if you want. You don't even need to speak to them. And also try and persuade them. They have a lot of conversation dialogue choices that you can augment to read you can project pheromones to try and help them convince you. You can read their personality types. There'll be a bit of a breakdown, a biography, so to speak, of the person you're speaking to, which should help you make dialogue choices that end in a more favorable way, or not. You can turn it the other way around. You can do all these kind of things. This is the stuff that this game is absolutely tremendous at. It's so fun and so good to play through all these ways. But it's not without issue. I decided on this playthrough to do non-lethal, because usually I go in guns blazing and blow everybody away, which worked out pretty well. Lots of melee takedowns, a lot of stealth, a lot of sneaking around, and even if you do get caught, it doesn't mean you have to kill anybody. You can do the melee. You can also use things like tranq darts, stun guns, all these kinds of gas grenades, which will just neutralize people. Lots and lots of options for how you should tackle dealing with enemies without actually causing a fatality. I really enjoyed this because the game heavily encourages this kind of gameplay. If you went in guns blazing from the get-go and you're just shooting people in the head as you would in a normal sort of FPS type game, then you will very regularly run into missions where they kind of go, you should not be detected here. This would be preferable. You will get bonuses if they don't know it was you. You should try not to kill anybody on this mission. So the game actually enforces that you do this stealthy type of approach regularly, because that's what the game's tuned to in terms of its gameplay. You can hug up against various environments. They have a really good system that allows you, if you're near a few objects, you can quickly dash to another one and lock into that and keep hiding, using cover in a Gears of War style, but with much better movement. It's very slick. It's very nice. There's often vents and hidden things to be able to get around various obstacles and things like that. And it very much encourages that kind of gameplay, which makes a very big contradiction to how the bosses work. This is odd, because I played entirely non-lethal for the most part. I didn't realize until later on that you could do this. But then you get to the boss fights that have to be done lethally. This is really strange, because it completely takes you out of how you're playing the game. And I think this was a big miss by the developers in an attempt to create more of an action scenario. And often what I ended up running into was that I would reach a boss. Obviously, I'm playing this without knowing what's coming on a first playthrough, and not having any real weapons to deal with the bosses. I would have things like stun guns and tranquilizer darts, which are ineffective against bosses entirely. I got lucky on the first bosses that there's lots of environmental things you can use, such as picking up, gas canisters to cause explosions and things like that, which eventually brought them down. But in canon, they do die. The bosses die. And that feels really awkward, because that's not how I'm playing the game, but the game forces that on you. All the way up until the end of the game, it will continue to do that. Without spoiling it too much, there's a particular cutscene towards the end where, even though I'm not carrying a gun, like an actual ballistic gun, in the cutscene that starts playing, Adam just shoots somebody, like, straight in the chest to kill them. And that was very much against how I was playing the game. And it's very unusual that in a game with so much choice on how you approach it, and an encouragement to do it stealthily and on occasion not kill people, is that you are forcibly made to do it during boss fights and in cutscenes, which isn't your Adam Jensen. So it's a big miss on that part. The strength of the game for me was not the main story. I actually thought the main story was immature and pretending to be overly complex when it really wasn't. There's quite a large array of characters involved in this. You're going to have to get used to a lot of names that are all heavily involved, because ultimately it's about grand conspiracy, corporate espionage, all those kinds of things. And you're going from A to B. There's political elements. There's lots of stuff happening globally. You do travel very regularly between massive outworld maps where you get to visit and have different scenery and environments of what you're playing in. Yet, that stuff gets a little uninteresting. What is absolutely so much better in my eyes are the side stories. When you do reach a new part of the world, you will have your main story to go on, and then people will either have an obvious piece of dialogue while you're walking past them in the street to grab your attention, or somebody will approach you and you will begin some sort of side mission, which are far, far more interesting for me to deal with. You'll deal with some crazy elements, from emotional trauma, dealing with police officers, to issues at brothels, where really a lot of human trafficking and things going on. And because you're Adam Jensen and you're the big badass that's now in town, people would really like your help, including putting age-old mysteries to rest. And alongside this, you're obviously going to be doing a lot of hacking. I do want to point out here, the hacking minigame that is featured here is the best I've ever seen in a video game. And I've played a lot of them. It's engaging all the way up until the end of the game. This was something I took part in, even kind of knowing the thing I was hacking, the computer terminal or whatever, wasn't going to give me anything useful. Just doing the minigame and getting some extra viruses to play with and stuff was totally fine. A little bit of XP, a little bit of money. All good. Really had a lot of fun with this, so big thumbs up. And inside these you're hacking computer terminals and people's home PCs, is you're going to get a bunch of emails that's going to back up the story or give you extra codes. It'll let you know there's a hidden safe in a building, different ways of approaching things. There's a corridor that links two buildings together. Lots of backstory and world filler coming through these emails, and for the most part, they're very relevant. There's a couple that are thrown in for fun. You will have the classic email from the Nigerian prince trying to get you a ton of money, spamming you. A little bit of fun and giggles as you go through that, but well worth doing. There was very rarely through the entirety of the game a computer I walked past that I did not hack just for the sake of it. Perhaps it will give me access to security cameras and robots and turrets and be able to disable and manipulate those things, but often it wasn't, and that didn't matter. So really good world building going on there, especially with the little self-contained side stories. Because they're self-contained and usually only maybe 3 or 4 steps, despite the fact you can do multiple approaches to solve them, you get just a nice little story that's usually very focused. And that's where I think the main story fell off for me, because it was very predictable what was going on, even to the point that seemed a little contradictory as to what you saw as the player versus what everybody was telling you. Particularly in regards to what's going on with Dr. Reed. To me, it was very apparent where this story was going, but the game plays it like you wouldn't know this. And that's where it feels a little immature. It's like, maybe as a teenager or a kid, I might not have picked up on these things, but certainly as an adult, I was like, well, it's blatantly not going to work that way. Like, it's very obvious where this is going for me, and that's why I kind of lost interest. It's like, I kind of get where this is going. One sad criticism I'll say is it doesn't like to deal with the consequences of that. Even though there are better ways of playing out this story which wouldn't have harmed it in any way, shape, or form, in my opinion. But they're a little afraid of having that happen, so the way they solve that is when the resolution to some of these storylines comes through is the characters you're dealing with kind of need to be dumb. Even though they're not. You know? They're not. They're doctors, scientists, CEOs, wherever it might be. But when the whole thing starts to culminate, they have to sort of, in a Deus Ex fashion, right? They have to have the MacGuffin, and the MacGuffin is that these guys are kind of like, oh, I didn't think that would happen. And, well, that was blatantly what was going to happen. Like, it's very obvious that's the way it was going. I did hear from a number of my audience as I live streamed this, is that when they were younger, this went over their heads, and it was like, oh, like a reveal. So I get their target audience made sense, but if you are going to go back and play it, that's something you need to be aware of. I just will say that the side stories for me were considerably better. I want to mention here the DLC. The DLC obviously came out after the main game. However, when they released it, its relevance... No, it's not relevant. That's the wrong word. It's chronologically happening in the middle of the main story. So they released a DLC, but it's actually based midway through the story. And so what they decided to do was hard-paced. If you own the DLC, you are forcibly sent on that DLC in the middle to late part of the game. You don't have a choice. It doesn't say, would you like to do the DLC or anything like that. You can't launch the DLC from the main menu. If you're playing through the game, the DLC just happens. It diverts you off into the DLC. You'll do the DLC, and then it will bring you back to the main story. Now, in theory, that makes sense, because the events that happen during the DLC are happening before you are going to the conclusion of the game. But they needed to balance this DLC to make it make sense. And what they decided to do is just strip away all the augments and things that you've collected throughout the game to restart you from scratch. And what they'll do very quickly is give you a few points to spend. But you're going to be, unless you skipped a ton of content, which some people do if they're rushing the main story, you're going to have nowhere near the abilities you've had up until that point. You're going to get reset. Now, I will say this, fortuitously, they do give you everything back at the end of the DLC. So you've basically just got a bunch of extra points. But during that period of time, it's quite frustrating. Because you just feel, especially if you've kind of done everything, you've been a bit completionist about it, you have a lot of really fun tools. And the thing is, the augments are really, really fun. That's a good thing. The augments are extremely fun, but then they take them away and you're like, oh, I'm going to work these back. And you don't. You get a few, but you're going to do the DLC kind of bare bones. And the DLC environment, it takes place on a ship, is not particularly interesting compared to the rest of the main game. It's very lackluster. The story is very good, and you can see where this contrast comes in. The story is very good. Thankfully, the game is very fun to play, so it's not a problem particularly. It just feels odd for a DLC to do this. And then at the end, they have to contrive a reason to get you back into the main story, given where you left off the main story to go and do the DLC. It's almost tongue-in-cheek at the end. Like, we need you to do this exact thing you did to get here. And even Adam's like, why would I ever do that again, considering where this led me to in the first place? And like, it's kind of important. It's because the main story just had you go from A to B. Now it needs to go to A to C to B and come back. But the way A left off, they need to start B that way again. So a little odd. At the conclusion of the game, though, it's kind of sudden. The conclusion of the game will present you with a number of choices depending on how you played things through. Once again, you are struck with the issue of the non-lethal versus lethal playthrough, even at the final boss, which was a little frustrating. I will say this. As I got to the final boss encounter, I spent I quote-unquote did it in the first 10 seconds of it starting. Because if you've got high hacking skill, you can actually cause something to happen that resulted in certain characters' deaths, which I obviously did not want. So I then spent the next maybe 20 to 25 minutes trying to do it non-lethal, and that seemed to be working, as I was using non-lethal weaponry, I was stealthing around, I was dealing with a number of things, only to find at the conclusion of the boss fight is all the work I had done to keep people alive, they just died anyway, which was really quite frustrating. There's something very awkward about finishing something and thinking you found a great success path, only to then realize everything I just did was an utter waste of time and I could have done this in about 30 seconds, which is what I accidentally did at the beginning of the fight, even though I didn't try and kill anybody, it just sort of happened. Yeah, it was a big waste of time. That was very frustrating. Again, in a game that has so many choices and approaches to how you deal with things, the boss fights being extraordinarily linear was very odd. By the way, the ending of the game does bring us to a choice process. 4 choices total, I believe. But unfortunately, that just plays a cutscene in a very Metal Gear Solid fashion. If any of you have ever played any of the Metal Gear Solids, even from 1, you will know that at the end, Kojima's Metal Gear Solids will result in just a very lengthy, sort of very dramatic cutscene, which fits the theme of making Adam Jensen the coolest man alive, and very sort of deep. It's a very I'm 13 and I'm deep finish with the growly voice. The future is bright. You know, that kind of feel. But that's how the game plays out, and it was extraordinarily fun to play. My final verdict on it is like a high B, mainly because the main story and some of the disruptions you go through just aren't that enjoyable at first, but thankfully just playing the game is very fun, and the side stories being more of a highlight than the main story, which, depending on who you are, might actually be a bonus. For me, a high B, almost an A. I will be going into Mankind Divided in the future, so stay tuned for that. But Deus Ex Human Revolutions, enjoy if that sounds very fun to you. Bye, guys.